Welcome to the Talking Toughness series of podcasts, where we examine the mental toughness concept with guests from a wide range of sectors, illustrating that our mental approach to what happens to us and around us matters for all of us. Our guests come from the worlds of business and public service, education, social mobility, sport, and health. They all share their experiences and their observations about the factors that have enabled them to survive and to thrive on their journey through life. Many guests have gone further and incorporated the concept into what they do as coaches, trainers, managers, and leaders, helping others to thrive in their turn. Their experiences are valuable to those of us who strive to do the same. Our guest today is a man of many parts, and all of them interesting. This is Paul Trainor. Paul is, amongst many things, a director of Salford Red Devils Rugby League Club. It's one of the UK's leading rugby league clubs and has just enjoyed an absolutely superb season. And 10 years ago, Paul founded Positive Synergy, which is how we came to know about Paul. Positive Synergy works with individuals, teams, and organisations in sport, business, and very much in the world of education, looking to develop high-performing people and teams. The mental toughness concept lies very much at the heart of Paul's work. Prior to this, Paul was a senior leader in several academies and schools, and I think he also found time to play a bit of rugby at some time too. So today we're going to talk about how important mental toughness is for the development of people in all sorts of places and at all sorts of ages and at all sorts of levels. So welcome, Paul. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Doug. Hi, John. Thanks very much for inviting me. Absolute pleasure to be on here.
I know it's great for us to have you, Paul. And as Doug knows, I'm always a little bit excited when we've got a sport related guest on.
I'm going to sit back and relax.
And that to me, that's obviously the kickoff question for me would be, in what way do you incorporate what you do from a kind of a mental point of view, a mental toughness point of view, in your role as director at Salford Reds?
That's a really good question. I guess there's probably different strands to this. Obviously, primarily, we're doing work with the players around mental toughness, and we've made significant progress as a club over this past 12 months with a really high quality player pathway program. So we've done quite extensive work at that level, because obviously what we want that player pathway program to be is when the players come through it, they are ready to step into Super League. And we've got some really big goals around that player pathway program, producing players for Super League.
Is that from kind of mid to late teens?
Yeah, so we've got what we call our Reds program, which is 14 to 18-year-olds, which is a very structured program around player and people development. We're really keen on having good players as well as good people, and certainly within our club, we do a lot of due diligence. We do a lot of looking into and development of players as people. Not just for their rugby careers, but also beyond as well. So we kind of invest in them at both ends of that spectrum, as a young player coming through, but then also supporting them for life after rugby as well. Because rugby can be, a really short career, as I found experience. And it's something where by developing things like mental toughness and working around the theory of that with them, not only does it benefit them on the field and on the training ground day in, day out, but also, kind of that it will stay with them for the whole lives, which is something that we're really keen to support.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. And the fact that it's happening at the academy level through the pathway, you're front loading that rather than certainly working in sports psychology. You come across lots of examples where you get called in once people are in a problem, rather than kind of thinking, do you know what, we could have maybe developed some interesting skills that might have helped support people before they encounter them. And I suppose one of the things I I'm always interested then in that sense of they're people and you care about these people. And when they grow up and they come through a pathway with the genuine belief that the club cares for them, I always find then that, do you know what, players trust you a little bit more. So when you ask them to do a little bit more or run through a proverbial wall for you, you've kind of built that trust. You can't necessarily do that when you just bring someone in and ask lots of them without really giving them that extra thing. So presumably the players must hugely appreciate it.
Yeah, and I think the context of Salford Red Devils is slightly different to other Super League teams and probably most sports teams actually, in the fact that we don't have a benefactor, so we haven't got somebody ploughing money into the club. So it essentially means we need to run it as a business. And when we look at it in that perspective, and this is why we're really keen to develop good people, because when we're investing, whether it be in a player on the field or somebody into our off-field team, we need to know that they're going to fit into what we're trying to do. Because perhaps we haven't got the same setup as some of the bigger clubs, but certainly this season has proven that we can challenge at the top level of the table. And a lot of that is down to the character and the culture that the coaching staff have built with the playing group this year at first team level, but that also being supplemented by the momentum for the club as well. We're really clear on what we want to develop. We are a community club. The board of directors largely are fans, like myself, who've had a great deal of involvement with the club and have a great deal of passion for the club, and we want to see it compete. So actually, our way of doing things may be slightly different, but actually what we're looking to have a reputation for is being a club that does things well and does things the right way. And part of that is the way you treat people. So when players are coming into our group, and there's all sorts of examples in the press, certainly in the second half of the season when we won 10 out of our last 11 games. And it was comments about the culture, the group of people that they refer to themselves as a body of men, a band of brothers, and it's very easy to say stuff like that, but I would say that certainly within our squad this year that's been completely true, and has impacted on what's gone on the field as well. But that link to our supporters and our corporate partners is central to that as well. It's one club. We have our hashtag is Together Stronger, and that's what we seek to be, across the whole community, the city of Salford and Greater Manchester as well.
Yeah, it's great. And it's so refreshing then in professional sport to see that continuing link to a community that it's representing, which is how they were all founded in the first place. And I feel, because of course communities last, and if you don't have that link to the community, you see these just plethora of short-termism that you see in professional sport. I know as fans we all want to win the next game, we want to, but it's nice to see when a club sort of recognises that bigger picture, that it's actually, it would be nice to win the next game, but it's building the legacy and staying true to values that kind of matters.
Yeah, and we've got to create a compelling vision that brings people along with us. And whether that be a player looking to sign for the next year or two, or whether it be a school child who is 8 years old and has come to watch our team play, and looking for a role model, looking for a hero, that all forms part of that vision. And it's something that, perhaps some levels of sport take a little bit for granted, and perhaps can with some of the brands that are around in perhaps some of the bigger brands in football, for example, where, that level of support, that level of numbers of supporters will always be there. But, there was a game earlier in the season, we had something called the Building the Future strategy, and we work with schools and community clubs to engage with them. And that's not just about getting them to come to games. It's about, we do some work with mental toughness on them. We do work with mental health with the schools and community clubs, coaching our players, go out to presentation evenings and so on. and there was a game on Sky, and it took our players nearly an hour to get back into the changing room because they were signing autographs for all of the children who come on to watch the game as part of the Building the Future programme. Now that is like gold dust, because for the club's perspective, it's amazing. But actually, you look at the pictures that were taken of kids getting autographs and having pictures taken and so on, and that's where you develop a bit of a love. So, all of these things go hand in hand. I know we're going off topic slightly, but these things all go hand in hand because we're looking to create a culture where all of these little things are important.
You've not gone off piste at all. I think this is quite central to a lot of the work these days and a lot of things that really interest us. Because when you spoke earlier about not having a benefactor and you're actually having to operate like a business, you don't have a safety net. But when we work with businesses, and I think probably when you work with businesses, you'll know very much there is a added level of pressure. You have to go out there and get your business. You can't assume it's going to come. Nobody's going to give you that safety net. So that adds a level of stress, pressure, sometimes opportunity, sometimes challenge. But we talk about that in terms of mental toughness as being the solution is to create a culture of resilience and positivity, to be able to take the knocks, but actually to be really optimistic about the future. So you're talking about that, I assume, about the culture of Salford Reds, but that kind of idea also matters in society. Society's got to have that sort of culture as well. So the idea that you are integrating that into your community, I think is actually central to a lot of things that people should be doing. So would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And the position, of whether it be players or just the club as a whole, it's a privileged position, and we have a duty to the young people, to our fans, to our corporate partners, to reflect what they want their club to be. We reflect the city that we're part of and the region that we're part of, which is, is hardworking, down to earth, but really ambitious and wanting to succeed. And that's what kind of sums up our approach as a club. And I guess, again, linking it to the mental toughness, it would be, it's all well and good to sit there thinking, oh, it'd be nice if we had X amount of money coming to the club from a benefactor. But actually, that would probably not be true to what we're trying to do. And when we look at controlling the things we can control, actually that really refocuses us on, so what can we be better at? There's no magic money tree anywhere. So what can we be better at? What things can we actually control and change? And that's been at the centre of our thinking for, I've been on the board now for 4 years, just over 4 years. And it is that mindset, and I think you're right, Doug, it does permeate through everything else, because like I say, we want, we're doing this work around mental toughness. However, this work isn't necessarily going to be a shock to anybody because it's how our club is anyway. And it's really important to be true to the region, the city that we're representing.
I like the sense that you're creating an idea that you can stand up on your own. You don't necessarily have to go to anybody cap in hand for support. You remind me a little bit of that. You have to be a certain age, so forgive me, John. A few years older than John. But I remember President Kennedy's inaugural speech when he became president. And what he said was something along the lines of, don't think of what your country can do for you, think what you can do for your country. And I think you're capturing some sense of that, that society doesn't exist without the people in it and the organisations in it, and they've got a responsibility to add to and to create that society. I think sometimes we can lose that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, with all of the work we're trying to do, whether it's through the Building the Future strategy, whether it's through what we do on match day, what we do in terms of, because part of the, again, an example is with the Pathway programme. Not all of the players on our Pathway programme will become Super League players. That's not that we just cast them aside. And there are some examples, high profile examples in all sports of where Pathway programs just, they'll take 1 out of 100 and cast everybody off the side. We're looking to set up jobs for people who don't quite make full-time status. college courses in place, university degrees in place for them. And we're not on our own in doing this at all, but it's all of these elements that actually go to doing things the right way. And I think that again, it's very easy to say that, but if you're going to say it, you've got to be true to it with your actions as well.
Absolutely. I was interested in, I know your company has positive synergy, I was thinking about that synergy part when you talk about people and performance and things like that. And I would just wondered what your take might be on, I always find it strange, right, in sport, when people talk about sort of looking after the well-being of people and also elite level performance, as if they're contradictory terms. And I don't know about you, but I love winning. I feel great when I win. I kind of think that the two of them should really go hand in hand. And I say that I actually have an ongoing research piece at the moment that's sort of addressing this question that some researchers have asked as to whether mental health and mental toughness are compatible in like elite sport and high pressure performance environments. So what might be your take on that, Paul?
I think, and I liken this to, I worked in schools, secondary schools for 20 years, across the northwest of England in some challenging situations, challenging schools as well, but great schools. And I think sometimes, we look at things being reactive all the time, whether that's work around mental health or whether that's work around just health and well-being. I think possibly as a society where, there's a problem and we try to solve it. And I think a lot of the work, and certainly this work we're doing at Salford with mental toughness, and the work that my business does in sports, other sports teams, businesses and schools as well, is about being preventative, being proactive and looking to upskill people in order to be able to cope with the pressure or to be able to, kind of take control of what might happen next for them. And I think that's kind of a key discussion, and just to give an education example, lots of schools will always focus the resources on the year 11s for their GCSE results, and they'll throw all sorts of resources there. And often then, that may or may not bring success. But for me, you invest that in year 7. So when the time comes for them to get to year 11, the kind of the used to it, it's the way of working. And I think it's the same with that respect as well, John. In the fact that, it's not just something we do as a reactive situation because there's a problem. It's about what we do all the time to try to alleviate the problem or upskill the people enough to be able to deal with the problem when it arises.
Yeah, I think that's a great way of looking at it. A great analogy that I've not thought of before in terms of an education environment as well. That's really kind of, I think, like when you lay it out like that, it makes sense, doesn't it? It's,
yeah, and obviously it's like I said at the start about doing work with the younger players and being very clear on what we call it the red thread, the things that go throughout the club in terms of actions, behaviours, and you can't start to come in and impose those things on first team players. What you want, and it's the Liverpool boot room is a great example of that, isn't it? About how people were coming through in the Liverpool way of being, the Liverpool way of living, and you had managers coming through that boot room who were very clear of the tradition and history of the club. And it's the same, you want players to come through knowing what being a Salford levels player means, or and that transfers itself to any setting. You want people being very clear as to what you stand for.
Yeah, and what I love about embedding that in the pathway, from the age of 14, this sort of red thread is it becomes a culture that means something, that actually counts for something. If you walk through the corridors of any professional sports team's ground and training ground, you'll see slogans, you'll see words written up on the walls that represent a vision or a culture or a philosophy or something. But often it's words, and the idea, because so often you'll see like this detachment between the first team and everything, especially when you do have big benefactors, that the first team back rooms start to try and imbue this culture in people that are there for 2-3 years and gone. So I love that idea of the red thread, something that means when by the time someone is in their early to mid 20s and they're with the first team, like those words have a meaning behind them. They have a context. They're not just something that could have just been taken off the latest episode of Ted Lasso.
Yeah. And again, professional sport is a great example of that, isn't it? Where the clubs who change managers regularly, change players regularly, and with that goes that that culture changes every time you have that change. Whereas the more forward-thinking clubs, and I'm thinking, Brighton in the Premier League is a prime example at the minute, where they've been planning through a really great setup, but a top-class director of football in Dan Ashworth, who put all these wheels in motion, and those things have stayed. The personnel have changed, but those things have changed. The key features have stayed. Sorry, I'm fortunate enough to do a little bit of work with some football clubs, and because I have a problem, I can't work in rugby league, so I don't want to benefit any other team other than Salford.
Of course.
Or businesses or schools and colleges for that matter, where there'll be things that are laminated on the wall that are just wallpaper. People just walk past them. They have no impact on actions on a daily basis. And again, it's like you've said there, that, the how you get those words to actually mean something and to be like the letters through a stick of rock. And you can suss it out a mile, can't you? I go into some very wonderful looking receptions with some very, very good words, and it doesn't always match up what you see behind the scenes.
Paul, you do a lot of work in schools, and obviously your background is in the world of education. To what extent do you see the world of education beginning to pick up these ideas? Because we do a lot of work and we find there's an awful lot of lip service paid to it. So,
I think, and it goes back to the discussion earlier about where schools place this. I was really fortunate. My first, and I've been really interested in aspects such as this from being. I was a professional rugby league player, signed at the age of 16, but I'd never played rugby league before. I was a sprinter, so I really quickly realised that I had a huge gap in my experience and understanding of the game, perhaps to people I was playing against and people in my team who were competing for my place. So I was always looking for ways to try and be better and to try and maximise what I could do. And this was in the early 90s, so rugby league was part-time then, so it wasn't like I was having any intensive coaching. I was getting exactly the same as everybody else, but it was very much kind of a sink or swim environment, really. And if you made a mistake, it was made very clear you'd made a mistake. So I was always really interested in that, and I'd worked with throughout the 5 schools that I'd worked in up to this point. But when I went to my 6th school and met Steve Oakes, and that's really forward thinking, and we were actually teaching mental toughness. It was actually a lesson in the timetable, and it kind of made a lot of the work I'd done previously make sense, if that makes sense, in the fact that I'd done lots of work around growth mindset. I've done lots of work around resilience with kids I'd worked for 15, 16 years prior to this point. But when I was introduced to the concept and met Steve and loved spending time in Steve's company, and then it being that important, we really started to see some traction from it. It's where schools will see it's kind of a bolt-on, quick. Year 11 have got their exams in a few weeks, let's make them mentally tough. That's when, its impact is obviously diminished. I see both sides of that, where you could just be invited in to do a speech, and the expectation initially, until, I kind of obviously give a very clear answer on this, but the expectation would be 2 hours with me and that's it. The walk mentally tough and all the problems will be solved. But it's how it permeates through everything. It starts right at the start of year 7, if it's a secondary school, obviously. How the teachers are using that language on a day-to-day basis, how the leaders are making it important. That's where you really start to get traction with the work around mental toughness.
Oh, completely. I mean, I don't intend to. There are some excellent head teachers around, and we've been working for the past few years with one up in Carlisle, and they're a case study, perfect case study. They've transformed the school. It is performing remarkably well, but its students, when they leave, are well-rounded individuals and they succeed in the next stage of their lives. We also see the opposite, and I remember going to see one head teacher who basically said, look, I'm a couple of years from retirement, don't rock the boat, don't change anything. And I thought, well, you can't do anything. Quite happy for me and our team to wander around talking about what we do, but they weren't going to do anything with it.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and you know, again, it's like anything in a school perspective. It's the adults with the working with the young people who are the biggest advocates for anything. So if you want to make something important, it's what they're talking about, it's how they're behaving, the personal qualities they're showing. And when you start to build that momentum, as we did at the previous school where I was working with Steve, where it was important, and actually in that context, which was an area of really high deprivation, you know, where sadly too many kids thought the script was written for them, and you know, at 11 years old, well, I'm going to do this because that's what everybody else does. And actually, you know, it's part of a wider piece of work around, and we use the hashtag opening doors for all of that work, because we were given the impression that by developing these skills it can open doors for your future. You know, by getting results, it can open doors for your future. And I think, you know, I'm a huge advocate for it, obviously, but you know, it should form part of something that all schools are doing, as far as I'm concerned, because the impact is far greater than, with all due respect to GCSE results, the impact on young people coming out of an education system is going to be far greater than GCSE results will be.
Yeah. And do you find that young people respond really well to the ideas? They even grasp the ideas?
Yeah, obviously our slant as a business when we're working with schools and colleges is from a sporting perspective, because, you know, I have a really great example of mental toughness, Lee Mossop, who is a director of business with me, who you know, kind of went through 11 shoulder reconstructions and was told to retire after his first one, but kept on going and found ways to kind of keep his career on track. Ended up playing at the highest level internationally, led Salford out at grand final at Wembley Stadium for the Challenge Cup final. So, you know, again, got a story to which epitomises mental toughness. And again, it's like working with business. You know, business and education can learn a lot from elite sport, I think. And you know, it's an engaging subject, hopefully. So yeah, largely, you know, we get really good feedback on the sessions.
Yeah, and I wonder just to sort of probe a little bit more, because I'm really interested in what specifically what you might do in the schools. I love the idea of I suppose it ties in with what we call life control, you know, of recognizing that your script isn't already written. I mean, I go into a comprehensive school in Grimsby, the idea of going off to college and stuff like that means, what are you doing? That's not for the likes of you. Why don't you get yourself a proper job, you know? So it's really interesting and sort of seeing that being one of the things. But could you dig a little bit deeper just into the specifics of what you might do in the school?
Again, so we really pride ourselves on our work being bespoke, because again, it's all to context. You know, lots of schools will have different things to focus on, and I think it's very presumptuous, and you're not offering a great service if you're just going and delivering the same thing to everybody. But typically it would be, you know, we might be working with a target group of students over an extended period of time. So we might see them 6 times over a period of an academic year. You know, have a launch, you know, where Lee would talk through his story and use some of start to throw some of the mental toughness language in there, showing examples of how he did this and what challenges he faced and what rewards he got at the end of it. And then we do some specific teaching around those skills. You know, so we talk about life control, for example, and start to look at, well, what does this look like in the future if you plot this out, and what potential might there be, what opportunities might there be there. Everything we do, though, is supplemented by work we do with the teachers and the parents, because obviously just doing it in isolation and seeing them for a couple of hours every 6 weeks, if it's not being backed up by what teachers are saying and what parents are supporting with, then it kind of undermines what we're trying to do. Or doesn't undermine it. It doesn't maximise the potential of what we can achieve. So that in a nutshell is how we approach it. Like I say, we've got fantastic feedback and real impact in what we've done as well. Particularly around aspiration, ambition, having a plan. Because again, and I think back to being a 14, 15, 16-year-old kid growing up in Bury, in North Manchester in the late 80s and early 90s. I didn't have a plan either. And it would have been, I would have loved for me to have been in a session that we delivered, if that makes sense. So, and having an understanding of, well, this is actually what you need to put in place here and not let things happen to you. And it's gone okay for me, but there's plenty of people who it didn't go okay for, and they kind of lost the way a little bit. So,
yeah, that's exactly what you were kind of describing earlier, with this sense. I think we're guilty of it in sport as well, actually, a lot of the time, but in a lot of areas of kind of having systems that select the mentally tough rather than develop them. Like you mentioned, traditionally sports teams were always, and some sadly are still like it, but take on huge swathes of young kids, and make it really difficult, and whoever makes it, great, and if you don't, you're out. So they probably end up losing lots of really talented but mentally sensitive young people there. Maybe could have maybe been developed. So yeah,
and that's a really good example of our pathway as well, because we've identified some late developers who, for whatever reason, it hasn't worked out in one or two other clubs, and they've either lost love of the game or they've gone back to playing in the community club game, which is great. The worst thing to do is to have kids fall out of a professional pathway and then never play the game again because the dreams have been shattered. But again, it's that thing of not missing out on that, because there's a huge cohort there of late developers who it may be physically late developing, or as you say there, it may just be they just needed some work, somebody investing time and energy in them, rather than just at this stage, because it's all very outcome driven, isn't it? At this moment in time, you're not what we want, and that's it. And I think it's got to be a bit better than that. And I think mental toughness for us will be really integral to what we're doing.
I think the other thing I like when you're describing what you do in the schools, kind of the use of storytelling as a mechanism of engaging people and bringing about change is such a sort of powerful mechanism, especially when you're trying to get that buy-in. So presumably, having the ability to be able to tell those stories is a big impact, especially in those early sessions.
Yeah, and it's also about, and this is where we engage with the school a little bit as well. Is it making it real? Because sometimes, however authentic your story is to you, if it's not relevant to the people who are listening to it, you're not going to get full value for the story. But I genuinely do feel that you create that engagement through storytelling, through allowing the young people to think what is possible, and part of that storytelling is them telling their own story, isn't it? And you get to think so how will results day look when you're making that phone call? What are you going to say if it goes to plan? What's the reaction going to be? And starting to build that vision of what that looks like and what that story could be. But yeah, I agree with you totally. And Lee, when Lee tells his story and he's got the video clips of him walking out in front of 7,000 people at Old Trafford for the grand final, for Salford's first ever grand final, when we were tipped to go down, that's a powerful story, whether you know about rugby league or not. So it's really important. But I also, John, I think that concept of storytelling isn't just working with school children either. It's it's that narrative that you create around any group, that people feel they can buy into and part of, which again relates back to what we're trying to do at the club.
That's brilliant, Paul. Now, I think we'll just bring it back to, well, I'm not sure we've wandered very far from Salford Reds at any time, but we'll bring it back to Salford Reds. What's next for Mental Toughness and Salford Reds?
So we've got a pretty significant project in planning with yourself and with Peter and with John, using the MTQ Plus with all of our staff, with all of our players and coaching staff, and then to base some interventions around that, which hopefully will bring about a real impact for us as a club and for each individual player, as well as it being a collective benefit. But also hopefully some really interesting case study information about what that looks like in current day rugby league. Because again, we're seen as an opportunity club, but we also like to take opportunities as well. And obviously, the opportunity to work with yourselves on this will be really, really impactful for us.
Fabulous. That's a really good point at which to finish. And Paul, it's been a brilliant session. Thank you so much. Normally, we talk about, well, what was the learning point or what was the takeaway? I've actually written 5 down here. So the kind of things that have really struck me is the way that, when you're working with people, the way you've approached their development with care. And that has struck me. You really are interested in what the purpose is, and you are interested in making sure that you're not just throwing stuff at people, that they genuinely are absorbing it, and they're absorbing it at the rate they can take it. And then I love the bit about the way that you integrate what you do with the community. And we come across organisations, and you will as well, where they say they're community orientated and they do these community projects, but you're taking that to another level here, and I think that's incredibly impressive. And then you're a club with a true sense of social purpose, and personally I'm delighted that you see that mental toughness as a concept has something to contribute to that. And I like the idea that you can create a resilient and a positive community. And I agree with you, we work also in areas of deprivation, and the first thing that strikes you is this belief that they can't do things, and that's the first thing you need to work on. And then I like the idea I think we all intuitively know it, but invest early, and I like this phrase, and it becomes the way of working. I'm going to steal that phrase from you and use it. And then the final thing is, you made a really snappy comment. You're full of snappy comments. You said something like authenticity is okay. You can be authentic, but relevance is just as important. And you're absolutely right. So there's loads to take away from this. It's kind of mind-blowing and mind-hurting at the same time, but it's great. So thank you, Paul.
No, thank you. Thanks, John. Thanks, Doug. Absolute pleasure. Really enjoyed it as well.